Hi everyone, I'm Bonnie Whitehead. Many of you know me personally. For those of you who don't, I have a master's degree in developmental psychology, and I've recently been a teaching professor at Lakeland College in Lloydminster, Alberta, teaching personality psychology and cultural psychology. The reason why I'm online tonight is because I think I have what I think will be important information for you that's relevant to what we're going through right now, with so many of us making adjustments in our home, businesses, etc., due to COVID-19. So, as I said, many of us are going through family adjustments, including adjusting to homeschooling children. Many of us also are going through or considering adjustments in our business or the way that we run our businesses due to the restrictions and procedures put in place to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. This evening I'd like to talk about, in the context of that, in the context of many of us making or being challenged to fill essential capacities that we maybe never have before. We're becoming our children's educators. We're shifting our business practices, as I said. I'd like to talk to you tonight about dealing with perfectionism when we have these high demands put on us. Also about two different views of abilities in the face of high pressure and change. It matters how you view your abilities and the ability that you have to meet challenges. And the final thing that I'd like to talk to you about is increasing your emotional and operational resilience in the face of failure. So as all of us are trying new methods to cope and trying to fill new roles, failure is inevitable. And I'd like to talk tonight about how to be resilient in the face of failure. There are many ways to classify perfectionism. There's actually, if you analyze it as a construct and break it down into its constituent behaviors or beliefs, you would find that there are a few different types of perfectionism, and they vary in terms of what they relate to and also in terms of their effect on mental health. So, socially prescribed perfectionism is the kind of perfectionism that we might feel exposed to or sense in ourselves when you're flipping through Facebook or Instagram and you're comparing yourself to kind of these socially prescribed perfect images. Do you compare yourself to those kind of images endlessly or kind of in a very demanding way, expecting yourself to live up to these socially prescribed images and feeling that you can't? That would be a description of socially prescribed perfectionism. Socially prescribed perfectionism actually has connections to depression and distress, which probably or may not be a surprise to many of you. However, that leads us into kind of my next point, and that is your view of abilities. So it is the case that in the face of failure, people may feel stress or depression, and that has a lot to do with your view of abilities and your view of your ability to acquire new competencies. So there's two types of approaches that, if you were to break down the population, you would find that individuals fit into one or the other generally. So the first approach or view of abilities is called an entity view. So people with this view of abilities believe essentially that they're born with a set of abilities, and that's what they'll have, more or less, for a lifetime. So these people tend to set lower goals to prevent failure. They see their effort as an indicator of ability. So you can imagine somebody with this perspective on ability going through life and assessing their failures and thinking that these are things that I'm not that good at in my life because I have to expend a great deal of effort to acquiring skill in these areas, and that's probably an indicator that I am just not very gifted or skilled in that domain. These people are readily affected by failure, and they tend to give up in the face of failure. The other view of ability is called an incremental view of ability. People that have an incremental view of ability will say things like, practice makes perfect, or everybody has to start somewhere, and if I keep practicing, as the saying goes, I could make a near perfect performance. So these people view errors as a natural or an instructive part of acquiring answers, of acquiring new abilities. And they don't tend to compare themselves with others. So if we compare that back to what we were saying about socially prescribed perfectionism, these people tend to be resilient to that kind of thing. They see their own strengths, their own steps forward in relation to themselves, and they're focused on self-improvement and not endless comparisons to others. Interestingly, these two different views of ability, so this entity view of ability, this kind of almost sense that your abilities are almost biologically or just inherently present and they're not going to change, or this incremental view of ability, which is sort of basically a practice makes perfect mantra, our view of abilities, they are related importantly to a concept called self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is this general sense that people have that if they apply themselves, they will be effective. They are able to win. They're able to accomplish their objectives if they apply themselves. People have more or less self-efficacy. So of course, some people on the high end will believe that if they apply themselves, they can win, they can achieve. On the low end of self-efficacy, individuals will believe, no, it does not matter how hard I apply myself, I will not achieve. I will not have the outcome that I'm desiring. Now, errors, you can imagine failure can have an effect on self-efficacy, but it depends on what your view of ability is. If you are an entity type person that believes that I have the abilities that I have and they will never change across my lifespan, can only be so good at sports, or I can only be so good at being my child's teacher, and I have constraints there. There isn't too much that I can do. If that's your view, that would be an entity view of ability, and errors can have a profound effect on your sense of self-efficacy in that type of view. Now, in contrast, people who have an incremental view of ability, they are resilient to the effects of failure. In fact, errors do not give them a sense of their general ability to achieve. Errors are just, as I said, a natural part of developing their abilities in an area. So, to sum up, what can we take away from this? Two messages to take away. Importantly, increasing your emotional and operational resiliency in the face of failure is related to both maintaining your self-efficacy and preventing it from being deteriorated. Or let me rephrase that. Increasing or staving off sort of depression or distress in the face of failure has a lot to do with increasing your self-efficacy. This is this general sense that you can achieve, and also mitigating things or stopping things that will deteriorate your sense of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, interestingly, is very affected by experience. If you have experiences where you are successful, they will inherently build your sense of self-efficacy, this belief that you can be powerful and achieve important outcomes in your life. So, as an example of that, many of us are familiar with or have been involved in 4-H. And of course, the motto, learn to do by doing, is actually, I believe, really closely tied to self-efficacy. The motto, in a sense, is saying that if you do it, you'll know that you can, and you'll have confidence in that. You'll learn to do, that is the power behind learning to do by doing. If you've ever had somebody or been given a card, perhaps at a graduation, that said that, you could achieve anything in your life, and you can, if you try to, what is the saying, shoot for the stars and you'll land among the clouds. You'll know that although those sayings are well-meaning, they don't land the same. They don't give you the same evidence that you are able, you can do this, like actually achieving something does. If you actually achieve well on a say a nursing test. Imagine if you were going to school and trying to be a nurse, and you achieved very highly on one of your exams. That would be good. That would be stronger evidence to you that you can be a good nurse, you can achieve in that domain, than just having somebody tell you that they believe in you. That's important, but it doesn't, that verbally affirming you without evidence does not land as deeply psychologically as actually having some substantive traction and achievement in that domain. And again, that is I believe the focus of 4-H really is to give kids substantive achievement in a domain so that they understand that they can achieve. And as a matter of extension of that, the direct relation or effect of that is increases in self-efficacy. Now, again, how do you be resilient in the face of failure? The answer is probably increasing self-efficacy and preventing things from deteriorating it. You can increase self-efficacy by doing small things in your day, achieving in small ways throughout your day. If you're at home and you're feeling distressed, you have a sense it has to do with a sense of perfectionism and that you're not achieving your goals or your standards, especially your goals or your standards that you may be deriving from other people, like on Facebook or whatever. It may be a good idea for you to chart out or to journal small successes throughout your day. So for instance, if you are a woman, putting on your makeup every day, if that's part of your normal routine, that could be a small success for you today that could build self-efficacy. If you, if you were a parent at home, it may build your self-efficacy to dress your kids nicely at the day. Even though you're going to be spending your day at home, dress your kids up. Make sure that you're sitting down for meals. Prepare a nice meal, not a hurried meal. Sit down for your meal. Clear the dishes away after the meal. All these things or any one of those things could be achievable things for you in your day that could build into your sense of self-efficacy at this time. Something, as I said, that deteriorates self-efficacy is failure combined with an entity view of ability. So that is failure with a belief with a belief that you've only really got so much ability, that you'll never be able to develop more past certain constraints. And so it's kind of the opposite of a practice makes perfect mentality. Failure in the face of an entity view of ability is related to decreases in self-efficacy. And as self-efficacy decreases, that is related to increases in distress and depression. And so a way to protect your sense of self-efficacy, this general belief that I can be effective in the goals that I have and the needs that I need to fill, would be to shift from an entity view of abilities to an incremental view of abilities. So let's talk a little bit more about what an incremental view of abilities is and what that may look like as sort of a goal that you might choose to have. Somebody with an incremental view of abilities has sort of an iterative approach to problem solving. It's said that Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, had about 3,000 attempts at creating a light bulb before he landed on the final one, which he patented over the course of 2 years. So that's 3,000 attempts in 2 years on a single invention. So many of the times when I've heard that fact discussed, I've always, and I think it was put this way even, interpreted that as, wow, can you imagine failing that many times and not being down about it? But I think it's really a mischaracterization to view what Edison did as failure. Edison really, I believe that it's just probably one of the most famous examples of an incremental view of ability and iterative problem-solving skills. And so what you can draw from the 3,000 attempts that Edison made at creating the light bulb is that there's thousands of ways to bring together the glass bulb, the filament, the electrical connections in a light bulb. And Edison's process was a trial and error process of combining those elements of the light bulb in different ways until he had what he felt was a near perfect product, the best it could be product. And so that is in a nutshell what an iterative problem solving looks like. It looks like putting sort of a draft form of a solution out there, thinking through what were the effects of that solution that I made, and then trying again, trying to improve. Okay, so that's iterative problem solving. It's probably the benefit of an iterative problem solving method is that you're not viewing each of those 3,000 attempts as a failure. In fact, an iterative problem solver, as somebody engaging in iterative problem solving, would tell you that that is not 3,000 failed attempts. That's 3,000 learning experiences that resulted in a transformative product. So that's what I would challenge you with. If you are in a position where you feel that the attempts that you're making at changing your lifestyle, at achieving in homeschooling, achieving in different domains that there's high pressure on right now to achieve in, if your attempts are deteriorating your sense of self-efficacy, your sense that you can achieve and you will be able to make it through and you will find solutions, my recommendation to you to stop that deterioration would be to shift to an incremental view of ability and shift to an iterative problem solving style. So instead of thinking of yourself as somebody that's solving a problem sort of like an archer releasing an arrow and hitting a mark, think of yourself rather as somebody who's driving a vehicle and who's making incremental adjustments in their steering to reach the destination. You are not delivering a arrow that's going to solve all your problems today. You're releasing a solution in draft form that you will reflect on and put out there again the next day. So that's all I had to say tonight. I want to encourage you to keep on putting out your solutions in draft form. Keep on putting out iterations of a solution in each of the domains that you're grappling with right now. And remember, it took Edison 3,000 attempts, 3,000 ways of combining the different possibilities until he found the one that was ultimately reproducible and worthwhile. And so our job right now is just to continue putting out draft forms of a solution, continue putting out iterative forms of a solution, and building our skill. I hope you have a great time. I hope you've enjoyed this message. If you're interested in hearing more on perfectionism and its relationships to distress and depression and iterative problem solving and these two different forms or views of ability, that is an entity view and an incremental view, I'd be pleased to hear from you. Thanks. Good night.